Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. The streets of St. Louis felt colder than usual on the night of November 20th, 2003. A chill hung in the air, one that wasn't just weather-related, but rooted in something unspoken. Beverly Genther had vanished, and the silence that followed was haunting. Beverly wasn't the kind of person to suddenly disappear. She lived a steady life, had a reliable job, and friends who always knew her routine. But that night, something took a dark turn. What the world would eventually learn was that Beverly's final moments had already come and gone, frightening, painful, and at the hands of someone who had once been part of her life. This is the story of Amber McLaughlin, born Scott A. McLaughlin. A name that would later be remembered not only for a terrible crime, but for what happened nearly 2 decades later, a moment in American legal history that continues to stir discussion and controversy. Amber was born on January 13th, 1973. Like many who faced troubled paths, her early years were filled with instability and emotional hardship. While early trauma never excuses future harm, it can often shape it. In McLaughlin's case, those scars ran deep. By 1992, McLaughlin, then known as Scott, had already been flagged by law enforcement. A conviction involving a teenage girl led to prison time and mandatory registration. It was a grim start to what would later unfold. In the early 2000s, McLaughlin began a relationship with Beverly Genther. But Beverly was more than a case file or headline. After enduring a painful divorce, she was working to rebuild her life. She bought her own home, drove herself to work, and embraced independence again. Her younger brother described her as the best sister anybody could ask for. Sadly, that relationship with McLaughlin began to unravel, and not quietly. It shifted from affection to fear. Beverly made the brave choice to end things, but breaking free wasn't simple. McLaughlin had grown erratic and controlling. Beverly took legal steps to protect herself, filing restraining orders and reporting disturbing behavior. But a restraining order is only paper when fear feels like it's following you home. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Beverly confided in those around her. She said she felt watched, that she'd been followed. Her instincts were sharp, and sadly, they were correct. On November 20th, 2003, Beverly never returned home from work. Her car was later found abandoned near her office, with her coat and keys still inside, but no trace of her. It's hard not to imagine the fear she must have felt. She'd done everything in her power to stay safe. She'd spoken up, and still, it wasn't enough. As the investigation began, all evidence led back to one individual, Scott McLaughlin. Recently released from custody and seen in the area that evening, McLaughlin quickly became the focus. Security footage, tips from witnesses, and tracking dogs painted a chilling picture. Eventually, the search ended near the banks of the Mississippi River. Beverly's remains were found in a secluded area, hidden in the brush. Authorities confirmed she had been the victim of a violent act. It was a cold and calculated end to the life of a woman who had done everything in her power to stay safe. Beverly's body, discovered near the Mississippi River, was a final heartbreak in a story already filled with fear. But her strength and determination left a lasting impression. Beverly Genther was not just a victim. She was a woman who stood her ground and fought to reclaim control until the very end. McLaughlin was taken into custody soon after. The case against her was strong, with physical evidence, witness statements, and a prior record that cast a long and troubling shadow. Prosecutors in Missouri began building their case, but what unfolded in court added another complex chapter to an already devastating story. In 2006, McLaughlin stood trial for the attack and killing of Beverly Genther. The jury reached a unanimous verdict of guilt. But when it came to sentencing, whether McLaughlin should face life imprisonment or the death penalty, The jurors couldn't agree. They were at a standstill. In most states, that would have automatically meant life in prison. But Missouri is one of only 2 states that allows a judge to decide in such situations. And in this case, the judge chose the harshest penalty available. McLaughlin was sentenced to death. Over the next several years, the legal process played out. Appeals filed, arguments heard, and motions denied. But during that time, a deeply personal transformation began. While incarcerated, McLaughlin began living as a transgender woman and took the name Amber. Those close to her said the change was sincere and deeply felt. But in the eyes of the public, the story was shifting. It was no longer just about a high-profile criminal case. It had become something larger. Amber McLaughlin became the first openly transgender person in the U.S. to receive a death sentence. To some, this marked a pivotal moment in justice and identity. To others, it clouded the core issue, the life that had been lost. For Beverly's family, the message remained clear. Justice delayed still felt like justice denied. In August 2021, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit reinstated the death sentence. The timeline was set into motion once again. Supporters of clemency argued that McLaughlin had experienced significant trauma growing up, facing emotional harm, neurological issues, and mental health struggles. They asked that these circumstances be considered, calling for mercy rather than punishment. But Missouri's governor chose not to intervene. On January 3, 2023, Amber McLaughlin was executed by lethal injection at the age of 49. In her final moments, she offered a quiet apology, saying, "I am sorry for what I did. I am a loving and caring person." Among the witnesses were Beverly's brother and sister-in-law. They weren't there for closure. They were there to honor Beverly's memory. Her sister-in-law, a nurse, later said, "I teared up a little bit because I was thinking about Bev. I'm not crying over Scott." Their presence served as a quiet but powerful reminder. This case was never about headlines or history. It was about a woman who mattered deeply to those who loved her. The execution drew nationwide attention. For some, it raised questions about equality, whether identity should alter accountability. For others, it highlighted gaps in how society addresses trauma and mental health before tragedy occurs. But for those who loved Beverly Genther, the politics meant little. They didn't remember the court battles. They remembered her laugh, her kindness, and the way she always tried to see the best in people, even when it put her in danger. Her story was buried under headlines. Her face faded from the spotlight. But Beverly was real, a person, not just a footnote. And while the world debated McLaughlin's identity, her family mourned a daughter, a friend, and a woman whose life ended in terror. This case leaves us with questions, some philosophical, some practical. Should judges be allowed to override jury deadlocks in capital cases? Can a person's transformation in prison erase the horror of their past? And how do we balance justice for the victims with compassion for the broken? In the end, Amber McLaughlin's name will be remembered in history books, but Beverly Genther's name should be remembered in our hearts. Because behind every execution is someone who never got to say goodbye. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please consider subscribing and giving it a like. Your support helps grow the channel and allows more stories like this one to be told and remembered.